George Kilpatrick, inspiration for the nation, celebrating people we feel good about. Well, they say faith without works is dead. So we got three pastors here who also serve in dual capacities in this community. Can you believe it? So let's start with Bishop Colette Matthews Carter, who is the president of the Syracuse Onondaga County chapter of the NAACP and the pastor of Zion Hill Baptist Church. We have Pastor Erik Jackson, who is the president of the Alliance of Communities Transforming Syracuse, better known as ASK, and the pastor of the Plymouth Congregational Church in downtown Syracuse. And we have Pastor Erik Eure, the newly installed president of the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance and the pastor of the Promised Land Church. So glad to have all of you. And let me just start by saying, I feel truly blessed this morning. So I really love this idea. So you are all in key leadership organizations in this community. And so what a time that we have this conversation. So I'm going to ask each of you, well, to tell us what your organizations do. I guess it's a no-brainer to start with the NAACP because you're the oldest, baddest, right? Meanest. Talk to me, Bishop Colette Matthews Carter. Your second term, by the way, as president of the NAACP. You got a state of the NAACP message coming up in a minute. So talk to me about what you do as the president of the NAACP.
Well, thank you, Brother Kilpatrick. It's always good to see you, and it's great to be here with my brothers in faith and ministry and activism. Well, you know, the NAACP, and I'll help you out a little bit. NAACP is the oldest, boldest, and baddest civil rights organization.
There you go.
February 12th, we will be 113 years old. And I think the thing about the NAACP is that its mission has kept the organization relevant over the years, because the mission of the NAACP is to eliminate race-based discrimination. And it seems that every turn, every century in this country, we are confronted with that very thing. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing to me that in 2022, I guess I just never thought that we would be here at this juncture to this degree. Mm-hmm. You know, of course, you know, being an African-American, Black woman growing up, you know, you're confronted with racism, you're confronted with those issues. But I think, you know, just, you know, the last previous presidential candidate, you know, president that was in office, you know, what happened on January 6th, the insurrection on the Capitol, just the visceral, just flagrant, you know, outbursts of racist rants and it's just a mess. And I just never thought we'd be here. So the NAACP remains relevant, unfortunately.
Certainly does. Thank you. Pastor, you're the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance and your work with the pastors. Tell me about this group.
Well, thanks. And let me say thank you for having us, George. And I think this is a seminal, if not historic moment. We have these great pastors who are leaders of these organizations. So the IMA goes back to 1972. We were originally formed back as far back as Pastor Forrest Adams, and most people don't remember him, but he was pastor at Tucker, and he formed this group, and it was really designed, and still is designed, to be a resource for clergy. As they look for tools and ways to equip their congregations, their families, the people that they serve, we try to bring these resources to them. Now, we've been fortunate enough that, you know, through our 501c3 to also do some other good work in the community. You know, some people don't know, you know, we partner with Jubilee Homes when they first got it started, when they were building houses. We initiated an annual Dr. Martin Luther King's service. We have Holy Week services, you know, that's multi-denominational. We also help formulate the funding that started the Vivian Teal Howard Nursing Home startup. We work with the city on a 10-point plan to reduce gun violence. We've done conferences, all kinds of health screening. So again, any way we can be creative to equip pastors and clergy, to equip families and help families, that's pretty much what our mission, and that's what we're really trying to do.
All right, Pastor Erik Jackson, the president of the Alliance of Community Transforming Syracuse, and also pastor of the Plymouth Congregational Church. Talk to me. What is it that the ACTS organization does?
So ACTS in Syracuse has been around now for over 20 years now, serving the Syracuse community and the greater Onondaga County area. And the unique niche that ACTS has in its capacity to make a difference is that I believe that ACTS stands at the intersections. We are a multiracial, multi-faith organization, and the common thread that links all of us together is our commitment to see justice in our communities, and not only justice, but liberation, equity, and equality flowing all throughout our community and transforming the systems that oppress. So there is a common commitment across our faith lines, our faith tradition, and all of that difference that brings people together, united under the one umbrella, under the umbrella of the common good. So that's what the unique niche that ACTS has in the city of Syracuse. And ACTS is also an organization that likes to be on the front lines, that shows up. So we have a community organizer. Not only do we have two paid community organizers full-time serving on staff at ACTS. Reverend Linda Briggs, who is our lead community organizer, and then Dwayne Comer, he's our community organizer as well, our local organizer. And a lot of his work is really focused on this work around called the Live Free program that's a part of the larger Faith in Action network. And what Live Free does is we seek to redistribute the resources and how budgets are being shaped so that we might be able to put those resources into action and mobilize people who have been formerly incarcerated, because we believe that the way towards having a just society is not through more retribution and retributive justice, but rather through redemptive justice, in that if you give people the resources they need, that's the way to actually reduce crime. That's the way to actually have peace in our community, when people actually have access to what they need.
Yeah, and by the way, I should mention that Erik Jackson's from my hometown, the Boogie Down, Bronx,
That's
New York.
right.
I just have to, I just have to throw that out there. He's from around the way, but it's all right. It's all right. I've been in Syracuse longer than I've been in the city, so but you know how it is. It just never leaves you.
Yes.
And so, Pastor, you talk about this being a historic time. Talk to me about why the significance of faith leaders, and all of you, I want a piece of this, but I begin with Pastor Eure, the significance of faith leaders in this time in our community, in this time in our country, and all that's going on, and what we're fighting for right now.
Well, in my lifetime of experience, George, a lot of that has gone on the civil rights movement, voter rights movement, began in the church with faith leaders, because at one point, that's who were galvanized behind, was the people we're coming to and being in congregational strength with. So I'm glad to see that the church still has a viable, active role in helping people not only have a spiritual healthiness, but also a civic, educational, health achievements still in our community. So again, looking around and seeing these other faith leaders who, again, at heart, they want to see families do well, to have these types of roles and positions, to me, it puts us at an advantage. And that's why I'm so glad to be collaborating with Reverend Jackson and Bishop Carter to make some changes here in our community of Syracuse.
Mr. Carter, what's your take on the significance of this?
Yeah.
Moment?
So George, there's always been an intersection between faith and activism. Mm-hmm. I think that the faith leader is able to draw upon this phenomenon that we call hope.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And that's what has always empowered and strengthened our movement, because yes, we had the oratories, we had the issues, we had the collaborations, but we also had to draw upon something that was beyond ourselves. The obstacles that Black people have been up against in this country, it took something more than just our human efforts. And so the faith leader has always been, fulfilling that role. And so with the NAACP, the history of the NAACP, I mean, there's been this countless numbers of faith leaders who have been involved in orchestrating and organizing and helping to lift up the mission of the NAACP. And I just see this as a manifestation of the role of particularly the Black pastor, in particular, the Black pastor.
Yeah, I mean, what you said made me think of a few things. Let me pick those up, and then I'll get to you, Pastor Jackson. But this notion of the secular, right? Because the NAACP is a secular organization, and then a faith-based, and the fact that you all are walking in those two worlds, right? And having to lead in that way. And as you said, historically in our communities, a lot of our great leadership has come from the church, right? Or I'm going to say the Christian church in many ways, right? We know that Pastor Jackson, I know there's many faith traditions, but a lot of, I'm thinking of that, this straddling the line. How do you see that, Pastor Carter?
Well, I would add one other thing.
Okay.
The other piece that I would add is that, when we talk about our understanding of God, at least from the Christian faith tradition, the God that we know, the God that we serve, the God that we project cares about the whole person, cares about the totality of our humanity. So it's not just, God cares about, our spirituality. He also cares about our liberation. He also cares about our quality of life. He also cares about our freedom and our equity and our well-being. And so, it makes sense, to be able to for faith leaders to be able to lead in this capacity.
Pastor Jackson, what about your thoughts about this?
My thoughts are that there's this myth, if you will. There's been a secular and the sacred, and we're trying to balance the secular versus the sacred, and what does that look like? But the truth is, if you go back to the very origins of when our ancestors came here as enslaved Africans, there was never there wasn't much of a distinction between what was so-called sacred and what was so-called secular. The Black preacher historically, when she or he came to this country, they were tasked. They didn't have the privilege of just being able to ideate about God, because we were dealing with the very real issues of shackles on our feet, our ancestors getting the cat of nine tails across their back. So the Black preacher always has been preaching about liberation. And back when we first came to this country, the message was abolition. It was abolition. That was one of the pillars of African American preaching. So I don't think there's ever been a distinction between the secular and the sacred, because now I'm even going back thinking about the ancient worship traditions of our people with, worshiping in the hush harbors. So they would have the worship that was in the woods, free from the colonizers, where they'd be able to express and worship in a way that was relevant to their experience, incorporating the traditions of our motherland into the worship experience and an act of resistance. And I can go on and on about that, but I believe it's always been in our DNA as a people for us to be the secular and the sacred, to be in conversation with one another and looking at how does the sacred speak to the secular right now. And I think now, even in this current age, about voting rights, about voting rights, about standing up to systemic racism and revisionist narratives of history that seek to sanitize history, and particularly in our education system. So I think that the task and the challenge is there very much for us today to continue in that tradition of abolition, of liberation, because that's what we need today. And historically, the Black preacher has always been had the sacred in conversation with the secular.
I see you nodding your head, Bishop Carter.
Oh yeah. These are my brothers, and Reverend Jackson. He and I, we we collaborate on so many things, and we've had these kinds of conversations. You know, let's be clear, the Black preacher, she and he have always had a liberation theology.
Come on.
We've always had that's our core. Now I know that things have, translated into other things, but our foundation, our basis, our core, our beginnings in this country was always about, liberation. So that's the tenets of our background and our history.
How do we move Pastor, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm thinking a lot of things have just flooded into my head. So let me just do like a sort of let me just throw all of these things out there. Number one, is there a conflict? And it's kind of almost contradicting what you just said, Pastor Jackson, but hear me out. Because you said that there's always been this conversation, this marriage, if you will, between the sacred and secular, do you feel as though there's ever going to be a conflict for you in terms of how you have to commute the work that you're doing in the secular versus what you're doing in the congregation? Or are you going to reiterate, no, Pastor Eure, it's all the same? And then my follow-up to that would be, because I'm thinking about do the churches still have the same power, right? I'm thinking of attendance, and we're in COVID, so now that adds another element, because a lot of it was the mobilization. The people are the people in the seats anymore? Are the young people, the people that were the backbone of the movement, are they still, which came out of the church? Do we still have those kinds of things? So, Pastor Eure, I know I laid all of that at your feet, and then your sisters and your brother, they can come in here too.
Well, we're definitely living in a post-COVID environment where the way we gauge and measure congregational strength, attendance, all that stuff has definitely changed.
Mm-hmm.
But to the point we've been making, the message of liberation, the message demanding quality of life for families and generational blessings and voting rights and healthcare and education, that message has not changed. We just had to be more creative now in how we get that message out there. And to your point too, George, I don't think that there's so much of a conflict, if you will, between the secular and the sacred, as Reverend Jackson put it, because we're all looking for a fresh, higher level of quality of life for the community that we serve. And rarely is that in conflict. No matter what denomination you are, we go to church, what side of town you on, you want to be safe, you want decent education for your kids, you want to go to work every day, you want to get a check. And that's what we're seeking to do, to empower our people to achieve those things.
Pastor Jackson, your thought?
I think for me, the example you gave, there is no conflict. There is no conflict. It's all the same. That's how I feel, because I don't ever think it's going to be a conflict for me in my congregation, because when you think about it, I know the pews, for example, you talk about how there's a difference in attendance, but if you look online, for everybody who's not in the pew on Sunday mornings, you look on Facebook, you look at all those views, they're in the pew, they're just not in the physical pew.
Right.
And as long as these issues continue to be in our society that create suffering,
mm-hmm.
that create brokenness, as long as these systems continue to manifest itself, I believe that there will always be a place for the church.
Yes.
And that has proven itself through every major era in time. Yes, we've been through this before with the Spanish flu. We've seen that era and a whole bunch of other different eras, but the church continues to remain. The church continues to stand as a center of life, a center of inspiration for people, and a center for nourishment, transformation, and change. So I firmly believe that the church has power, and I think a lot more power than what it actually realizes or actually acknowledges.
So the church has power, but now you're also leading organizations
mm-hmm.
in power in the community to liberate our communities. This is a critical time. And by the way, let me just reintroduce the panel. That was just Pastor Erik Jackson, Plymouth Congregational Church, president of the ACTS, Alliance of Communities Transforming Syracuse, Pastor Colette Matthews Carter, Zion Hill Baptist Church, and President of the Syracuse Onondaga NAACP, Pastor Erik, Eure, President, Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, and Pastor of the Promised Land Church. So saying all of that to say critical times, right? And so Pastor Eure and Pastor Carter and Pastor Jackson, how will you all use your collective strengths and powers in the organizations that you also head, and combining that with the power of the church? How will you collaborate, but then how will you have a different approach? How's this going to work?
Yeah. What? You want me to jump in? I can chime in first. I think that all of our organizations have perhaps a slightly different focus, but also a lot of common ground. Mm-hmm. And so I think the goal here is for us to meet on those issues that are common and collective to all of our organizations.
Okay. And
I believe that, one issue that we are meeting on is voting rights. I mean, that is a hot issue right now. The NAACP is front and center. I know ACTS is concerned about it. I know that the Black pastors, the Ministerial Alliance, everyone's talking about it, and we have to collectively raise that issue up within our community, because voting rights is center to our democracy, and so we can meet on that issue. We can meet on that issue, and we can draw upon our collective strengths and reach in the community to do that.
Pastor Carter, do you think because New York is woke, I'm just going to cut to the chase, where we good here, but that the battle is really in our brethren for other states, South,
right.
And other. Do you think that we have to raise the awareness that this is a national issue, because we good in New York, pretty much, right?
We're good in New York, but
we're not as
we
right.
Could not right. We have to.
Okay, I don't know who's good.
Wait, let me back up. Wait a minute. I'm sorry, I said we good in New York. Not necessarily, because a lot of things that other states have had for a minute, we just got the early voting.
We okay. We not.
We okay. But see, here's the other thing, though, Brother George. It's not just voting rights. It's voter education.
Voter education.
So the whole concept of voting and all those entry points. New York might be good or better positionally than other states.
Okay.
But we got low voter turnout right here in Onondaga County with Black folks.
Some of the lowest.
To the polls, and we need to go to the polls, and we need to educate young people about voting, and that's something that we can all do, because voting on the local level impacts everything that happens in our lives. It impacts everything.
Right.
We need to vote in these local elections. We need to vote. We need to mobilize and wake up our people, even though our state might be woke. I think that there are some sleeping areas in our communities.
And if we don't vote in these local elections, that could change too, right?
That's what I'm talking about. Right. That's what I'm talking about. Right. We got some conservative areas of New York, so we might be good in some areas, but we got to keep our eyes open.
Pastor Jackson, you was going to say something?
Yeah, I was saying I fully agree, because local elections do matter, and we have very poor turnout for local elections, very poor. But those are the folks that on the local level, that's what really helps. That's what really shapes the national agenda. What we see nationally. So I think there is, while New York historically, New York historically for the presidential elections, we kind of go one way and there's the turnout, but for local elections, that's the stuff the deep stuff that affects our everyday lives. The turnout is low. Yeah. And I would just want to say, for me, how I'm going to partner in this work, I think ACT stands, like I said, we stand at the intersections of multiracial, multi-faith. Most of all, I have a congregation that is 250 folks that are standing behind me and with me, alongside me, that encourages their pastor to go forth, because it is part of what they believe as well. So I think that's one of the key pieces. My own congregation, Plymouth, if I don't, for example, on Sunday, if I don't talk about, if there's anything pressing that happened in the world, I don't talk about it in the prayer or in the sermon. The first thing they ask me, Pastor, what happened today?
Yeah.
That. So I have that by church, my congregation, plus that I look at our participation in Acts. That also translates into another level of participation, and then from there branching out into the other organizations to partner with Bishop Colette and with Pastor Eure. So really, this is what we're doing here. Is really, I mean, when you think about it, grassroots, from the
Transformative in some instances. Pastor Eure, I got time for just, there's so much to get to on this thing, but I'll say this, Pastor Eure, what else, how will you collaborate? How will you have a different approach?
Well, what our focus is going to be on, again, being a resource and true to our core. How can we empower clergy, not just pastors, but clergy, with information as a resource that they can pour to their congregations? So, to the point, that we don't really have so much of a civic or civil mandate, but we are about empowering people. I want our congregations to be more active in the NAACP. I want the people in our congregation to realize the value of being involved with Acts that has a political arm and, that helps write legislation. And I think that's how we're all going to collaborate to bring about change and better quality of life in Syracuse.
There we go. So much more to get to. We'll just have to get you all back and get a report card. So right now, just the number one issue, and people say, what about crime? What about education? All of that too, right?
All of that too. All of that.
Quality of life, liberation, reform and criminal justice, systemic and ending in systemic racism and systems. And that's going to require work. In other words, we think we woke, but we not really right now. We got to get back on the street.
got work to do.
We got to get back into the thing. We have to do it. And I just want to thank you all for coming to start this conversation with us. Pastor Erik Eure, President, Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, Promised Land Church. What time of service is, Pastor, online and in person? Just tell me quick.
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock. Bishop Colette Matthews Carter, President of Syracuse, Onondaga County NAACP, and the Zion Hill Baptist Church. What time of service?
11 o'clock.
Okay. And Pastor Erik Jackson, the President of the Alliance of Communities Transforming Syracuse, and the pastor of the Plymouth Congregational Church. What time of service?
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. There we go. So as you're listening to this interview, folks, they getting ready to go in the pulpit and preach. So that's all I'm gonna tell you all right about that. All right, this is George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation. We'll find out, Syracuse, NAACP.com, Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, Acts. What's the Acts website? Real quick, come on.
Acts-Syracuse.org.
All right. And the IMA has a website?
We have a Facebook page.
Facebook page. Find it, Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance on Facebook.
Alliance. All information.
Listen, I can say I have been blessed. It's inspiration.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Appreciate y'all.
Thanks for having me.